Thank you, Presiding Officer. The oil and gas sector is vital for the North East and the whole of Scotland. The Rosebank energy development will create 1,600 jobs and bring £6 billion of investment to the country. Why does John Swinney oppose that?
First Minister.
Well, Presiding Officer, the issues in connection with the Rosebank oil field have been the subject of a very active case that is influenced by a decision in the Supreme Court today. So I will need to be careful about what I say in relation to the Rosebank case. Mr Ross will acknowledge the Scottish Government believes that any new application for oil and gas developments has to have associated with it a very detailed and specific climate compatibility assessment undertaken to determine whether any such development can proceed in a fashion that is compatible with our journey to net zero. And that's the approach that the Government believes should be the case.
Douglas Ross.
1,600 jobs, £6 billion of investment, and an SNP First Minister who cannot welcome that, who cannot support it, because the SNP oppose every single new oil and gas development in the North Sea. Oh, well, we're hearing no from Kevin Stewart. I wonder if John Swinney will be able to tell us which ones the Scottish Government support, because here's what some of John Swinney's predecessors have said. Nicola Sturgeon, who John Swinney stood side by side with for decades, said Rosebank was, in her words, the greatest act of economic vandalism in her lifetime. When the development was given the green light, Hamza Yousaf said it was it was the wrong decision. And just last week, John Swinney, speaking about new oil and gas licences, said the granting of them was utterly irresponsible. So why has SNP leader after SNP leader been against granting new oil and gas licences for the North Sea?
First Minister.
I think one of the reasons why Douglas Ross is leaving the leadership of the Conservative Party...
Mr Ross. First Minister. Mr Ross, we will not continue in such a manner. We must conduct our business in a courteous and respectful manner. First Minister.
Presiding Officer, one of the reasons why I suspect Douglas Ross is leaving the leadership of the Conservative Party is that he is not presenting an accurate picture of the remarks that I have made. Because
Members, let's hear one another.
The very specific remark that I made was that a commitment to undertake, without any scrutiny, 100 new oil and gas licences by the Prime Minister was climate denial of the first order and utterly and totally reckless. Those were my words, and I will not have them misrepresented by Douglas Ross. We've got a rational and considered process that we've argued for, which is that we should have that every individual application should be subject to a climate compatibility assessment, because there is a journey that we have to make as a country to reach net zero. That is inescapable. And what is clear from the position taken by the Prime Minister, supported by Douglas Ross and the Conservatives, is that they don't care about the journey on climate. They are not interested in the crisis that we face in the climate emergency. Well, this Government will take the responsible approach to managing that transition and the challenges of the climate emergency.
Douglas Ross.
Well, what we've just heard from John Swinney there, and his MSPs are applauding, is John Swinney and the SNP don't care about tens of thousands of jobs in the North East of Scotland. They don't care about the oil and gas sector, which is needed now for our energy security at the moment and going forward. Because when Rosebank was approved, when Cambo was improved, when any new development is approved, the SNP oppose it. They oppose new oil and gas developments. And let's hear, that was the previous First Ministers, that John Swinney didn't seem to want to hear what they'd said in his own comments, that new licences were utterly irresponsible. Let's hear about some of his current Cabinet Ministers. Mary McCallan, the Energy Secretary, said this: "We do not agree with the UK Government issuing new oil and gas licences." I'll read it again. We do not agree with the new UK Government issuing new oil and gas licences. This is the SNP Scottish Government Energy Secretary. And I've got here a letter her predecessor wrote. Neil Gray, the former Energy Secretary, said this. He was writing to climate activists. We have long expressed our concern about Rosebank being given the go-ahead. And before that, we had Michael Matheson, who brought forward a consultation on a presumption against new oil and gas licences. So why does SNP Energy Secretary after SNP Energy Secretary oppose new oil and gas licences which are crucial to the Scottish energy sector?
First Minister.
I think if Mr Ross was to look at the material the Government has published and the process that we believe should be taken forward in a rational and considered way, he will find that the Government's position is anchored around a number of principles. We've got to assess the compatibility of any oil and gas licence application with the journey towards net zero, and that has got to be a rigorous and thorough process that has to be undertaken. Secondly, we have got to consider issues in relation to our energy security in coming to that assessment. And thirdly, we have got to take a responsible approach to managing the transition to net zero. Now, I am not going to stand here and be lectured by a leader of the Conservative Party whose party presided over the industrial devastation of central Scotland, the consequences of which we are still having to address as a government. So this government will take the responsible approach to the management of the oil and gas sector and its transition to net zero, and we will take absolutely no lessons from the Conservatives.
Douglas Ross.
There is nothing, John Swinney, rational or considered about turning your back on the Scottish oil and gas sector by claiming that you are against every oil and gas licence, but being unable to say it, being unable to be truthful with the people of Scotland. The First Minister should just be honest. The SNP oppose every single new oil and gas licence being issued by the UK Government. That is the case. Because whenever a new development is proposed in the North Sea, the SNP oppose it. They oppose every round of new licences granted for the oil and gas sector. In recent years, they have not supported any new fields. Not one. Whatever John Swinney is claiming today, it's only a temporary position for the SNP, because their position is actually very clear. They don't and will not stand up for Scotland's oil and gas industry. They are willing to put tens of thousands of jobs and the North East economy at risk. The Scottish Conservatives support Scotland's oil and gas industry. Why do the SNP oppose it?
First Minister.
I'm not sure Douglas Ross is on his strongest ground, taking me to task about honesty.
Mr Ross, I would ask you to apologise for that comment.
I apologise again for calling the First Minister Honest John.
Mr Ross, we are not going to continue like this, and I would ask you to reflect on your conduct. First Minister.
I don't think Douglas Ross is in a particularly strong position today to raise issues of honesty with me when the Gambling Commission is investigating the alleged conduct of senior figures in the Conservative and Unionist Party. I think Douglas Ross is on thin ground. I also don't think.
Sorry. This is actually First Minister's questions, where many members across this chamber wish to have an opportunity to put a question to the First Minister. I'd like to make sure that is possible for as many members as possible, and in order to do that, we must conduct ourselves in a courteous and respectful manner. First Minister.
And I also don't think Douglas Ross is on strong ground in attacking me about the rational and considered position the Scottish Government is taking when the Prime Minister is ignoring the climate emergency by sanctioning 100 oil and gas licences without any questions being asked. That is irresponsible. Yes. That is the action that will accelerate the climate emergency. So this government will take the rational and considered approach to oil and gas developments. We will also support the oil and gas sector to transition to the essential work we need to undertake on renewables, because Scotland's future lies as a green energy renewables powerhouse, and the Scottish Government is putting in place the measures to make that happen.